So first of all, I probably need to thank the hosts, the organizers of the entire series, of course, of these lectures, but also specifically for inviting me to share my insights, probably perceptions. Too often social scientists pretend to have discovered the truth. I do not pretend to have discovered any truth. I would rather say that whatever will be said here by me now in this class is probably placing myself within this spectrum of possible truth. So therefore, whatever I say should be treated as simply the way I perceive or see the things, either because I have certain limitations or because I have access to certain data and so on. But I do not pretend that what will be said is an absolute truth. So that's a kind of a disclaimer. But the other thing which actually bothers me much more than this pretension of ultimate truth is that I have a very interesting task here. I don't know if any one of you have been to any of the Baltic states. Probably, possibly, Brits like, because it's cheap beer there, you can go and have fun. So that's fine. I don't know whether the Belgians do that. The thing is that the Baltic states seem to be on the periphery of anything and everything. I mean, they do exist, but hey guys, are you really in the EU? Do you use euros? No way. You know, I always get this kind of thing. It's like, wow, it can't be true. I mean, really? Well, yeah, you joined the EU 10 years ago, or it's actually 11 years now. So people still discover, and I wouldn't mind if they did this somewhere outside of Europe, but inside of Europe and within Europe, that's kind of, well, not bizarre, but strange enough. So I don't know to what extent you have been exposed to whatever history and the present realities of the Baltic states, or any 3 Baltic states that I'm going to talk about. So therefore, I feel that before I start telling you the things that I'm supposed to tell about, I need to start with an introduction, and of course I will not talk about the history of these glorious nations, whatever. But some background probably would be in place. So before I go into the actual matter of the class or the lecture, I need to provide some background. The other thing is that, of course, when I was invited to come and talk to you, I thought, what should I do? How should I approach this topic? Not that I didn't know anything. I do know quite a bit. I have been exploring, as Anne just introduced me, European Muslims or European converts, and especially converts in the Baltic states, for a decade or so. So there's much information that I have and might want to share, but maybe it's just a bit too much. So all in all, what I did is I came up with some 30 slides. I don't know whether you have the same thing, but I always have this, that when someone's showing a slideshow, it's like, how many slides does he have? So it's 31. I mean, this is the 31st, so it's 30 slides. So you may start counting. I didn't put this, so you will know when I will end. I will try to be brief in the beginning when I talk about this background, so that is just a general thing. To those of you who are familiar would say, yeah, I know. Fine, but it might be beneficial to those who might not have that much information. So, but first, of course, why is it only the Baltic states? Something's missing here, but whatever. I don't think we need to do anything. So the questions that I will be addressing once I eventually go into this part will be, what is actually meant by this changing face of Islam? What do I mean by the changing face? And of course, ultimately, or the second and most important question that I will be trying to tackle is what consequences or repercussions that changing might have, or maybe already is having on, and that I list before aspects that I will touch upon to a certain degree, some more, some less. But as I said, where are we physically or geographically to be looking at? And this is the Baltic Sea, which it's only some countries that call it Baltic Sea, because Swedes call it the Eastern Sea. And for whatever reason, Estonians actually even call it the Northern Sea. I don't know, but Well, we in Lithuania call it the Baltic Sea, and the three Baltic states, as they are known collectively, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are rather small countries located, as I said, on the periphery of what usually is perceived by Western Europeans as Europe, because then it's Belarus, Russia, and it's not Europe anymore. Okay, now the basic sort of statistics, so that you have a clue, because I myself always like when I talk about societies, about states, so that we have a clue as to how big the populations are, and especially the concerned populations. So in Estonia, what we have is, as you see, a rather smallest of all three nations, where Estonians, or ethnic Estonians, make more than 2/3 of the nation. Whereas in the Latvian case, it's somewhat different, although the Latvian nation is a bit bigger. In Lithuania, Lithuanians are an overwhelming majority. Now, all these countries have their national languages, and Latvian and Lithuanian are collectively called Baltic languages, whatever that might mean. Whereas Estonian is not similar to either, whereas it is also at the same time similar to Finnish. So Finns and Estonians can read each other's texts, whereas Latvians and Lithuanians cannot understand Estonians. Anyways, so but then you see that there's a significant minority which is either ultimately ethnic Russian, or what I have called here other Slavic speaking, be it Ukrainians, be it Belarusians, or whoever else who would speak Russian at home and among themselves. Now, in Lithuania, we have a slight difference compared to Estonia and Latvia, because we have a Polish minority, which is also Slavic, of course, I know, but it's just that the other countries don't have. Now, when it comes to religion, what is so very interesting, and Estonians are probably very proud of this, that 1/3 of the Estonian population in the census, and now here is the census figures, whereby I can provide them, that 1/3 of the nation declared that they don't believe in anything. On the other hand, it's around 30% or so, a bit more, 35%, 1/3, who declared to belong to one of these Christian denominations, be it Lutheran, Orthodox, Baptist, or Catholic. So there's another 1/3 of Estonians who do believe in something, but it's definitely not Christian beliefs. Now we might say, well, maybe Muslim? No, no, no. These are pagans. They believe in spirits. So Estonia is quite unique in this regard, that Christians are a minority, 35% or whatever, if you just add here, non-believers and pagans or polytheists or whatever, also 1/3 of the nation, each. Now, Latvia has Lutherans, but also Catholics and Orthodox, as you see, Christians, whereas Lithuania is predominantly Catholic. At least this is what the official statistics tells us. In the case of Latvia, the census in Latvia doesn't allow to ask one of his or her religious affiliation. Therefore, these figures are the ones provided by the communities. And of course, if you add, you realize that, hey, this is just 80%. What about 20 remaining percent in Latvia? I don't know, whatever they are, but we don't have statistics, so we may only work on these either extrapolations or figures provided by the communities themselves. Now, finally, Islam in the Baltics. Now, I am tempted, and you may not agree with me, you may not go along, but I'm tempted to see the situation, both history and contemporary situation of Islam in the Baltics as rather different, not probably unique, but rather different from the rest of Europe or from most of the European countries. First of all, when we talk about the arrival of Islam, Islam came to Lithuania more or less at the same time as to the Balkans, to Bosnia. But we know, whereas in Bosnia, or the Balkans in general, it was a Turkish Ottoman advance where Turkish army would move in, would occupy and annex these lands that would later then become parts of the Ottoman Empire. In the Lithuanian case, it went the other way around. It was the Lithuanian dukes who would go to Muslim lands, would take some prisoners of war or hire some mercenaries and bring them back to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So it wasn't that Muslims came as occupying force. We did have a segment of Muslims who actually came to Lithuania back then in the 14th and 15th century as immigrants, as political immigrants if you want. But of course that is a totally different experience from whatever type of immigrants we might now have in what's referred as Western Europe. So in this regard, I would claim that history history also of Islam, arrival in history of Islam to at least Lithuania is exceptionally different from most of the countries in Europe. Now, when it comes to Latvia and Estonia, it actually is a rather late arrival or appearance of Islam in these countries because it was during the Russian Tsarist period when actually all of these countries, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, were part of the Russian Empire, that Muslims, mainly from Kazan, that is Turkic-speaking, Tatars, Bashkirs, and the others started arriving, but not in big numbers. So this is sort of a snapshot. Of course, we could go on, but I would argue that when it comes to history, it's rather different in the Baltics. Well, the history of Islam, of course. I mean, from the history of more or less elsewhere in Europe. The other thing is, if we talk about the contemporary developments, things that I will have to talk, of course, about, I would say there are, many, and probably the list is not exhaustive, could go on, but many aspects were, or which those aspects make the situation in the Baltic countries rather different from most, if not all, other European countries. And of course, if you study the development of Islam in Eastern Europe, elsewhere, some of you might say, well, but Ukraine would probably also have the same experiences, or Belarus, or Poland, and you will have Katarzyna in a month or so. So she'll talk about Poland, and then you will realize that what I will have said now about Lithuania, and say, but you said this about Lithuania, why are you telling this about Poland? It's because Lithuania and Poland for a while were in a joint country, so therefore when she will talk about Polish Muslims, it's the same people, because back then Lithuania and Poland, as I said, was just one country. But never mind. So there might be some similarities with Eastern European countries, but definitely not with either Western, Northern, Southern, or even Central European. And here I mean Czech Republic, for example, or Slovakia, or Hungary, which have not experienced anything that the Baltic states are currently experiencing. So I will not go over all these points. You can read them when I talk, but these are the things, or this is the stuff that I will then, of course, explore in detail in the following slides. Now, so when I claimed, and I said that history of Islam in the Baltics is unique or different, so as I said, Islam first came to Lithuania in the 14th century, in the mid-14th century, or first part even of the 14th century, but the time when the biggest influx happened was towards the end of the 14th century and in the beginning of the 15th century. And it is believed by scholars that at one point in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was much bigger than the state of Lithuania now is, there might have been up to 100,000 Tatars. And if we say that back then virtually all Tatars were Muslims, then we would then say that the Grand Duchy might have had, or must have had, up to 100,000 Muslims in the 15th or 16th century. Now, what is also interesting and unique in this regard, that the Tatar nobility, also meaning Muslim nobility, who could prove that they had been of noble, or that they were of noble origins, the Grand Dukes and later the Polish kings, or Polish-Lithuanian kings, granted nobility ranks, so basically made them equal to local Christian nobility, and gave, well, not exactly all the possible rights that the, say, Christian nobility had, but rather many. Of course, the nobility were the minority. Most of Tatars were simple people working on the estates of the nobility. Now, what is also important, of course, whenever we talk about the presence of Islam in Europe or elsewhere for that matter, one of those things that is visually recognizable is the mosques. And from what we know is that the first mosques were built maybe not back in the 14th century yet, but definitely in the 15th century. We know that all of them were wooden. I mean, in Lithuania we have so much wood, or we used to have, not anymore, IKEA, you know, took all the wood. But we used to have much wood, and of course mosques would be wooden. And they would tend to burn, of natural causes or not so natural. So we don't really have mosques that would have survived from those centuries, but we do have surviving mosques, the oldest of them being almost 200 years old, wooden mosques. And of course cemeteries that would naturally form either around or, you know, in the vicinity of the mosques, or maybe separately. It's not necessary that the mosque and cemetery go together. Yeah, and then this migration lasted until the 16th century. But when I said this, it only applies to Lithuania and to the current Republic of Lithuania, or the state, but also to Belarus and parts of Poland, because this is where the Grand Duchy was back then. Now, those of you who sit in front, you probably can see better. Those in the back might not be able. Now, it says here, P of Lithuania probably means Principality of Lithuania. Of course, it should be the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which back in the 14th century didn't look that big enough but not that big. But what is a key point here is that the Khanate of the Golden Horde was a neighboring state. So the Grand Duchy of Lithuania had a border with a Muslim state, if you want. And it's only natural that there'd be certain encounters, cooperation, but also conflicts. And if we take another map, which is from the 15th century, we already see that the Grand Duchy extended all the way to the Black Sea. And then there was no more Golden Horde, but there was Crimean Khanate, which was a Muslim, of course, country. And then, of course, then it was swallowed, if you want, by the Ottoman Empire, but that's later on. So, in any case, Lithuania, or the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, had direct, immediate border with the Muslim states. Now, the current republic, you might see, is basically here. It's just this small part. Now, what is important is that when I talk about the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, I don't necessarily imply that it was ethnically Lithuanian. The Lithuanians, the people who spoke Lithuanian, must have been a minority, because even the official language of the Grand Duchy was Old Slavonic, Belarusian. So we have a problem with these guys in Belarus, that they claim that the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was actually the Belarusian country. But that's, you know, yet another story. So this is just to illustrate. I don't know how accurate these things are. I mean, it wasn't me who drew this. Now, if I were to give a sort of an overall assessment of historical situation of Muslims in Europe, and when I say Muslims, of course, I sort of mean Tatars here also at the same time, is that they, I would claim, and they would also themselves claim, have successfully integrated into the society at all levels. And the question is, why? On the one hand, because the authorities, the late authorities, if you want, have been rather positively predisposed towards Tatars, Muslims. And also, what is bizarre, or strange, or unexpected, that the mainstream society, which was Catholic, of course, was not so antagonistic, not so intolerant of these different people who would pray differently, who would, you know, do things differently. And also the Catholic Church itself, which was very powerful back then in Lithuania, it also seemed not to be threatened, afraid, or whatever of the Muslim presence, and therefore we don't really see that many cases where there'd be some sort of either officially imposed or even, you know, criminal discrimination or restrictions and so on. There were some, but very brief, and they would not last for long. But also, of course, there is this main thing, that there's this loyalist nature of the Tatar Muslim communities who would claim to be very loyal and would want to belong to a sort of bigger nation. Here I have a picture of surviving Lithuanian mosques. It's only 4 mosques that survived all the wars that went through Lithuania, and we had many wars, much destruction and so on. Of course, there were many more mosques prior to World War I. It is believed that there could have been up to 25 mosques, and some of them actually have been documented as having been on the territory of Lithuania. But as I said, only 4 have survived. During the Soviet period, the communist period, only 1 mosque, which, you know, even to me now it looks like a barn. I mean, it's not a good quality picture, and then of course on this wall, it does not really suggest it is a mosque. I mean, probably the only building that you would recognize as a mosque is this, which is the only brick mosque, which was built in Kaunas, which was the interim capital, the city that I teach, but I don't live there. And I might tell you a joke about this particular mosque. In 1930, it was the time when the Lithuanian state as such was commemorating the 500-year anniversary of the Grand Duke Vytautas' death. This is that university I work for, Vytautas Magnus, the Grand Duke Vytautas. So it was 500 years, and then all sorts of celebrations were going on all over the country, because Lithuania feels that Vytautas was the biggest leader, ruler of the Middle Ages. And the Tatars would approach the government and say, look, you know, we would want to build a mosque in the Grand Duke's honor. So just to honor him, that would be our contribution. We build a mosque and name after him. The joke is that the guy, of course, had never been a Muslim. He was a failed Christian. He tried twice. So basically the Tatars said, we will build a mosque to honor a failed Christian who died a pagan. A double apostate. Well, and the government, of course, didn't think in these terms and said, well, sure, go ahead, you know, Vytautas, yeah, the Grand Duke, fine. So the Tatars, when they got the permission, they come back to the government and say, look, there's one problem, we don't have money. Can you build for us? And the state said, whatever. So it is actually the state that built this mosque between 1930 and 1993, and it was open 3 years, sort of late, but it's still there. It's open, you can go and pray or simply visit in the middle of Kaunas. The rest are the ones that the communities built themselves, and well, they have been rebuilt, of course, numerous times, because this one, mosque in a village that is actually officially called the village of 40 Tatars, 40 Tatars village, that mosque is believed to have been first built in the 16th century on the very same spot, but it had been rebuilt numerous times. So, and of course there are cemeteries. You might not see cemeteries immediately, but there are cemeteries around these mosques, and many of the tombstones suggest that the cemeteries are older than 300, possibly 400 years. Alright, now but then when we look at the other 2 countries, I mean Latvia and Estonia, we see the situation is, as I said, rather different, because first Muslims came rather late. Now, those of you who have come across history of Islam in Estonia, you would immediately recognize that it's exactly the same time and it's exactly the same people who came to not only Latvia and Estonia, but also Finland back then. But Finland was also part of the Russian Empire, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. Now, as you see, the organizations started establishing themselves prior to World War I, but what is also very interesting in the case of Latvia, and Riga, which is the capital city of Latvia, was the 2nd biggest city in the imperial Russia. And prior to World War I, the community was relatively big, I would say, whereas after Latvia became an independent state, in the aftermath of the First World War, then the number of Muslims decreased steadily to, well, basically, as you see, 70. So it almost evaporated. In Estonia, it's a somewhat different situation with the establishment of community, but also the numbers are meager. So, and especially what also happened that when the Soviets took over all 3 Baltic states, many of the Tatars from Latvia and Estonia actually migrated. So it was, for example, in Sweden, the first Muslims to come to Sweden were Tatars from the Baltic states. Now we have 500,000 Muslims and probably very few of them are Tatars. But that is also history in Sweden. All right? Then, of course, the only natural thing would be to ask, how is then religion in general, but also Islam, governed in the 3 Baltic states? And, of course, as most of the European countries, not necessarily all, the 3 Baltic states are constitutionally secular with no state religion. Oh, there are many states in Europe, in the EU, that do have state religion, like, you know, in Denmark, if you want, there's a Danish church which is a state religion. But what is important is that in Lithuania, 9 religious communities are recognized as traditional faith communities, and not only Christian, because in addition to the Christian, the usual suspects, you know, Catholic, Lutheran, Orthodox, then in Lithuania we do also have, for example, a Karaite community, and I don't know whether anyone of you have heard of Karaites, which is recognized as a traditional community, and of course Jewish communities naturally, but also Sunni Muslims. So when you think in terms of, okay, you have Catholics in Lithuania, remember 80%, and the others, and Muslims, and then the community is small, I will show of course the figures. So, but formally, Sunni Muslims, to make sure, and Catholics are on equal footing vis-à-vis the state. Because these are traditional. Then there are other categories of religious communities. Not that the others are not allowed to function. It's simply that the traditional religious communities have certain rights that others don't. Now in Latvia, what we have is also that they distinguish between traditional or historical and non-traditional religious communities. And also, of course, naturally, Orthodox, Catholic, Lutheran, and Jewish communities are regarded in Latvia as traditional. Islam is not. So Muslims are non-traditional, and they don't have the rights that the traditional communities have in Latvia. In Estonia, the situation is yet different, where, while they don't distinguish between traditional or non-traditional, they just don't care, put it this way. They say, oh, you want to be a community? Fine. Judaic? Fine. Muslim? Fine. Whichever. We don't care. Traditional or non-traditional. And of course, in both Latvia and Estonia, we have a situation where the state cannot, by law, support religious communities financially or even otherwise. Whereas in the case of Lithuania, the state does support. There's no constitutional requirement. It's not a law based on which the state supports religious communities, financially I mean, in Lithuania, but it's out of tradition. Every year the government allocates certain funding based on the figures, which of course are taken from the census. So it's only natural that the Catholics, who otherwise are the richest community, get the biggest share, with the rest getting much less. All right, finally, so how many Muslims do we have? Don't start laughing. You probably have more Muslims in Leuven than in all of those countries. That's the reality. That's, at least in the case of Estonia and Lithuania, when we have figures that are provided through census, the population census. And what is even more interesting, that in the case of Lithuania, the community seems to be shrinking. That it's less people who said that they're Muslim in 2011 than there were in 2001. Some of you might suggest maybe people are just shy, put it sort of politely. Maybe they don't want to tell their religious affiliation. Well, possibly some, yes, why not? But I don't see any ground for this. I mean, as I said, being a Sunni Muslim is cool because you are one of the 9 traditional faith communities. So there's no problem. You actually have access to many goods if you claim. And if Sunnis claim to be Muslims, or all of them would do that, then the figure rises and probably the finances from the state side increase. So I wouldn't see a point in not telling your identity, religious identity, or concealing it. Now, in the case of Latvia, as I said, we only have estimates because no one knows. And then you could have a figure as high as 10,000, but what does that mean? And who exactly could then be counted as Muslims? And then, of course, it's only natural in many cases where we cannot we cannot know for sure the religious affiliation of individuals, then this extrapolation based on ethnicity. If he is from Azerbaijan, he must be a Muslim. If he is from Kazakhstan, possibly a Muslim, and so on. But even if you count in Latvia all those who had come at some point to Latvia from the countries where Islam is a dominant religion, and of course including their kids and maybe grandkids, still you wouldn't come up with 10,000. It's just simply not available. So then you would start thinking of maybe Latvians constituting a big share, which is probably not the case. In any case, these are the figures, and they as I said in one of the earlier slides, indicate that the communities are minuscule by all standards, because not only that they're small, but in the sense of percentage of the total population, they're also not that they're non-existent, of course not, but very, very small. Now, the question is, inside those communities, who are the people who make the majority? And also, of course, I immediately have to say that not all Tatars or Azerbaijanis identify themselves as Muslim. So there is this discrepancy. You might have many Tatars, but not necessarily as many Tatar Muslims. But if we just simply now stick to ethnicities rather than their religious identity, then we see also a very interesting trend that Tatar community is dwindling. It's shrinking, and well, I don't know whether I should immediately say that it's destined to probably disappear. Well, I would come short of this, but when you compare the figures, and in 10 years, if they lose 10, 15%, sometimes maybe even 20%, then it's significant. Like in the case of Latvia, it's 1/3 of the community. In the case of Azerbaijanis, in Estonia it actually even increased, but in Lithuania and Latvia it did also decrease, maybe not by so many. I once again immediately realized that there's a double problem with Azerbaijanis. There's no such an ethnic group as Azerbaijanis. It could be Azeris and whoever else who might live in Azerbaijan. But we have a big problem in our censuses in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, because these people are regarded as ethnic Azerbaijanis, which is a problem, I know. And the other problem is probably also that many people in Azerbaijan might identify themselves as Shia rather than Sunni, so it's only natural that they would not be included in the figures that are otherwise for Sunni Muslims. But I tried to squeeze the statistics department and trying to get the figures, said, okay, we know how many Azerbaijanis are in Lithuania, so how many of them claim to be Muslim at all, or Shia and Sunni in particular? And then I couldn't get these figures because it's too small numbers, we can't really dig them out. One thing that might come as a new piece of information to you is that in Latvia and Estonia, when these two countries became independent, what they decided is that they would give citizenship only to people who could prove that they themselves or their parents or grandparents were citizens of either Latvia or Estonia when the Soviet Union occupied in 1940. So basically, if you had come to Latvia in the 60s, 70s, or whenever, from anywhere in the Soviet Union, and your parents or your grandparents had not had citizenship of one of those countries, you could not get the citizenship. And therefore, what we have is people who are sort of collectively referred to as Russian speakers. And there's a problem that under this category, all sorts of people fall. Kazakhs would be regarded as Russian speakers, although they might not actually speak Russian at home, and so on. But nonetheless, what concerns us here is that the bulk of Muslims who would fall into this category of Russian speakers would then be barred from getting citizenship. And therefore, many of them either chose or were forced to choose Russian citizenship, to have some kind of citizenship, and also a number of them became stateless, and some of them have these United Nations passports so that they can at least travel. But here you have some figures which are old in the sense that they're for 2000, but you see that out of 2,500 Tatars in Estonia at that time,
almost the same number with Estonian citizens as Russian citizens, but even if you add these two, you realize that a big number, 1,000 or over 1,000, were either citizens of some third country, don't know, or in fact they were stateless people. And then in the case of Azerbaijan, it's also what we have here is that only 162 in Estonia were. I presume majority were citizens of Azerbaijan, but that is also some sort of a problem. Now, in the case of Lithuania, it went somewhat in a different direction, and then the situation was and is definitely much more better, because Lithuania said, hey, any one of you who have been living in Lithuania for a number of years, if you want citizenship, we just simply give it to you. So this is what Lithuania did, and therefore we have never had any non-citizen element or stateless residents, as Latvia and Estonia have had. And of course, this also probably should be put in a perspective of what's going on now in Ukraine or between Russia and the West. Because in Latvia and Estonia, there are still people who are, as I said, so-called Russian speakers, who are either citizens of Russia or definitely not citizens of these two countries. And Russia expresses concern and then wants to help these people, so it claims. All right, now I call these groups the Tatars, but also others. And when you see this, what I have here, Soviet time colonists, I do not mean colonists in any negative sense of the word. I don't mean that these are bad people, but I didn't want to use them to call them immigrants. Probably internal migration and internal immigrants, yes. But in this regard, they were in their own country still, the Soviet Union, when they came to either Latvia, Estonia, or to a lesser degree to Lithuania. But in any case, these, in addition to Tatars of Lithuania, the Soviet time colonists, they would practice, and the majority of them would practice, well, some type of folk Islam, traces of legalist Islam, usually, not always, but identified as Hanafi school, and of course, in the case of Azeris, that would definitely be different. Now, but what is also important is that the Soviet regime, the communist regime, which was atheist and worked hard to make people abandon religious practices and beliefs, this they succeed to a very high degree, and this is why we have, for example, in Estonia, so few people who believe in anything. In Lithuania, also, we do have this 80% who claim to be Catholics. In fact, very few practice Catholicism. This is now, well, this is Catholic University. This is the period when people should fast and not eat all sorts of food, but most of the Lithuanians wouldn't care about this. So there's very little Catholic practice among Lithuanians, but that also would apply to Muslims who, well, I would claim that many, if not most of them, do not practice any form, never mind whatever type of Islam, and are Muslims by name more than anything else. And then, in fact, Islam has become a mere aspect, a feature of their ethnic, cultural, heritage. And this is at least what they would also themselves claim. Now, the other thing is that since they do not practice, and most of them don't practice, if you go to these mosques, and the mosques are owned by Tatars, you go to the mosques and you say, I'd like to talk to a Tatar, maybe to conduct an interview. People will look at you and say, Tatars, they never come here. Then where do they go to? They don't go anywhere. They don't come to pray. They don't care. So, you don't get them, actually. When you have whatever type of religious ceremony, either on Friday or also on a special feast, you hardly come across them. So I would even be tempted to call them to have entered this state of post-Islam. I don't know whether that is not, it's a contested term, and of course I might need to defend it, but I have a feeling of, that maybe it's the best way to describe them. I don't want to identify them as apostates or anything like that, of having abandoned Islam in this classical sense, but that is some sort of post-Islam. What is also problematic that the younger generation is even less religious. The oldies still can get an old Tatar or whoever, an Uzbek, a Kazakh, come to the mosque and occasionally pray. The younger generation don't show up. They wouldn't know even Surah Al-Fatiha, never mind other things. But what is also at the same time important that it is Tatars, mainly Tatars, Bashkirs also in Latvia, who control and therefore run the local Islamic organizations, the formal organizations that have been set up, and also they own the property. So the mosques, for example, in this case in Lithuania, they are Tatar owned. It's the community property. Of course, it is open to anyone if you want, and then non-Tatar Muslims ideally, of course, can come and pray, and this is what we have, as I said, in Kaunas especially, where it is non-Tatars virtually who pray. But what is also interesting is that the state, either officially, like in the case of Lithuania, or sort of out of inertia, recognizes these Tatars or other Soviet time colonists and then their kids as the representatives of Islam, and then the question of which Islam immediately arises, but also as interlocutors with the state on behalf of the entire local Muslim community. As actually their lectures, attend them, and so on and so on. The converts who live outside of the region naturally get pulled into whatever processes going on in their respective communities. But we also have a totally new trend that both Latvia and Estonia have already cases of their citizens, converts, of course, who went to fight on the side of the caliphate in whatever, Syria or Iraq. Physically, I don't know. In the case of Estonia, it is a Russian speaker who converted from Orthodox Christianity. In the case of Latvia, a Latvian, an ethnic Latvian, no, Catholic or Lutheran by birth. But it doesn't matter. So, but we already have this, and sometimes, when I'm approached by my colleagues who do research on particular aspects in Europe, they say, "Do you have cases?" And I said, "No, we don't." You feel that you're, being left out. So, although of course it's not a good example when people join an organization or group or a state of this kind, but at least, okay, we finally have ours. I mean, Belgium has these so many. So, because we always lag behind, but of course you should treat this as a piece of joke. In Lithuania, thanks God, I would say, is still not there. Although, if someone ever came across a Lithuanian who had traveled to Syria, I wouldn't be surprised, but probably not from Lithuania, but via, I don't know, London, whatever. As I said, many are actually based there. And maybe I should skip this last part, unless we don't have that many questions, because also, what do we know in Lithuania about, in general, Islam, and also presence of Islam, or Muslims, in the countries. Now, since it is about media, and unfortunately I don't speak or can't read either Latvian or Estonian, then my example here is solely on Lithuanian. And this probably would not come as a surprise, and you would say, oh, well, in many countries probably. I would not necessarily suggest in Belgium, but this is how it often is being portrayed, and you get this elsewhere. So it's not unique, and I would not claim that it's unique what or how media portrays Islam in general. Maybe what is interesting is how media portrays local Muslims, and in regards to Tatars, it should probably once again not come as a surprise, is that Tatars, whenever it is about Tatars in local media, it's always positive. Tatars are cool, basically. But they themselves, on the other hand, as I said, don't want to go and talk. I mean, sometimes there's a situation, I call the mufti and I say, can you go on radio and explain? The mufti is like, ah, whatever. And that's the mufti, the highest, is, the cardinal in Catholic sense. And the guy's like, nah, don't care. Then it is the converts who try to explain Islam among themselves, of course, but also to the others. But whenever it comes to media, what media does is with the converts is that we now increasingly have reports on these failed marriages. of converts with you know, foreign Muslims. And then within these reports or analysis, which usually is a mock analysis, what is being done is that the choices of those converts would be questioned. And they would definitely be portrayed in a light where it's abnormal. So of course it is still, you know, in the Lithuanian sort of public discourse, it's abnormal to convert to Islam. To abandon Christianity, whatever, but to Islam, who would want to convert to Islam? So these kind of things are visible in the media, and also the commentaries to the texts when people can post online commentaries. These are also, and altogether, another thing. So then I would draw some conclusions. For those of you who have counted, this is 29th slide, so just one more to go. And I see it as a very big problem, not only because media fails in its mission, as I would see that mission, but it does, you know, something that ultimately does no good to either the community itself, because there's this misrepresentation of Islam in general, and also failure to present the developments in the community. But on the other hand, what media does is actually supports and even endorses this polarization, both the Lithuanian Muslim community itself, you know, good Muslims, bad Muslims, and the perception of it, I mean, the community of Islam in general among the readership. So, you know, Lithuanians are led to believe, oh, Tatars, these are cool guys, because they don't pray, you know, it's like, these are okay, like us. But these, weird, very weird, strange. And with this, I sort of come to the end. This is a picture of we don't have litas, our national currency anymore. I still cannot cope with this. It's been only 3 months. I'm extremely sad. I thought, you know, that euro is Europe whenever I travel to Europe. But I somehow seem now never to return from that Europe, because I always have euros with me. So I never am at home. I'm always, you know, on a trip. But we used to have national currency, which I was proud of, although aesthetically it didn't look nice. This is a commemorative coin commemorating the 600-year anniversary in 1997, when supposedly that Grand Duke Vytautas brought the two communities, Tatars and Karaims, this other community, which is technically speaking a Reformed Judaist community, to Lithuania. And these are the warriors who supposedly, or mercenaries probably, who protected the Grand Duke, because there is this legend that he was so afraid of locals that they would kill him, so that he hired these Tatars and Karaims to protect him from the locals. So that's 50 litas silver coin, rather expensive, I would say. However, of course, now it's